8 kilograms of cocaine hidden inside the governor's own office, and not carried by a cartel runner, not hauled in by a desperate smuggler trying to buy his freedom, but transported by the man officially appointed to represent the entire western region of the state. A man trusted with budgets, policy briefings, and community outreach programs. 8 full kilograms sitting less than 20 feet from the governor's desk, close enough that a person could toss a paperclip from one to the other. This was not a stash house near the southern border, not a dusty warehouse off a desert highway. This was the symbolic heart of state authority, the building where legislation was shaped, where executive decisions were signed, where public promises were crafted for millions of citizens. A space designed for governance, now turned into a polished, climate-controlled distribution point for a drug empire. This was not an outside threat creeping in through cracks. This was infiltration wearing a tailored suit. This was betrayal with a government-issued lanyard around its neck. This was poison moving through taxpayer-funded Wi-Fi. Anyone with common sense could see what it meant. And if the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation pretended not to understand the meaning of the threats found in the encrypted messages on Cook's devices, then there was only one translation left. It meant assassination. Not intimidation, not leverage. Assassination. It meant that the rot had advanced so far inside the system that the boundary between cartel operations and government authority no longer existed. They were bleeding into each other, and the evidence screamed something else just as clearly. He was a dirty cop, a very dirty cop. Not sloppy, not naive, corrupted all the way through. At 5:12 in the morning, Springfield, Massachusetts still slept under a thin veil of fog. Streetlights glowed like candle flames behind drifting mist. Parked cars sat in neat rows, beads of moisture clinging to their windshields. The Springfield State Office building loomed in stillness, its windows dark, its corridors empty, its halls holding their breath. But inside that quiet, something was about to snap. The breach began with a gesture, a gloved hand raised, 2 fingers forward. And then the building shook as tactical rams blasted the first steel door inward. The Drug Enforcement Administration, reinforced by elite Federal Bureau of Investigation tactical units, moved through the hallways with the precision of an organism made of shadows and discipline. No shouting, no frantic motion, no chaos. Only synchronized footsteps and the heavy, suffocating weight of certainty, the certainty of what they were about to find. A reinforced door buckled under the strike of a second ram, exploding open with a sound that tore through the marble corridor like a cannon shot. The noise vibrated in the ribs of every agent within 50 feet. Inside the governor's regional office, everything appeared painfully, insultingly normal. Photographs from ribbon-cutting ceremonies lined the wall. Reports waiting for Monday signatures sat in neat stacks. State flags stood perfectly still in the stale office air, and on the conference table, a sealed courier box. Clean, official, unremarkable. The sort of thing that arrived every morning without a second thought, until it was opened. Inside were 8 kilograms of pure cocaine, packed so tightly it looked like a beating heart trying to burst free from its casing. Next to it lay a 9mm pistol, the serial number meticulously filed off. An envelope stacked with $38,500 in cash, wrapped in rubber bands used by street dealers. And behind the desk, already in cuffs, stood Lamar Cook, Deputy Director of the Governor's Office of Western Massachusetts. A man paid by the public. A man who had spoken on camera about integrity, transparency, accountability. A man who had visited schools, held town halls, shaken hands with veterans, and promised families that their communities were safe. Now he stood beside enough cocaine to drown entire school districts. This was not a drug bust. This was not a sting operation. This was systemic betrayal, the kind that does not happen by accident. Because when the people meant to protect the system begin poisoning it from within, the collapse doesn't come like a storm. It comes like architecture failing, silently, structurally, piece by piece. If you are still watching, you already understand. This story is not really about drugs. It is about infiltration. It is about a network hidden in plain view. Comment, so I know you're following. After Cook's arrest, digital forensics teams seized the laptop on his desk. It was locked with encryption far beyond anything typically found in government administration. Layers within layers. Military-grade protection, private encryption protocols, a custom secure shell possibly written overseas. The Federal Bureau of Investigation Cyber Unit worked for hours, watching code lines cascade like falling rain across the screens. When the final lock clicked open, the case did not simply grow, it detonated. The screen filled with files, meticulously organized shipping logs, coded movement schedules, encrypted notes written in shorthand the analysts immediately recognized as cartel signaling. 14 months of activity, 19 separate shipments, all moved quietly through the state's own postal and administrative system. The cartel had adapted. They no longer hid their product in obvious smuggling routes. They hid it in legitimacy. Methamphetamine tablets were being pressed into counterfeit medication, pills indistinguishable from prescription stimulants, fentanyl-laced sticks disguised as vitamin supplements, crystals of methamphetamine, vacuum-sealed and labeled like diabetic supplies. All of it smuggled across the border from Mexico. And what the agents saw on Cook's Drive was just one link in a chain. Just one branch of a supply line spanning from cartel mills to American neighborhoods. These 19 shipments, each weighing between 8 and 20 kilograms, were not moved by criminals skulking in alleyways. They were moved with the help of people wearing badges, people carrying radios, people with access to restricted offices, people the public trusted. Because corruption is always more efficient when it wears a uniform. As agents traced the chain outward, following one encrypted message to the next, the names that surfaced made even the most seasoned investigators nauseous. These were not corner dealers, not drifting runners paid in cash and fear, not traffickers lurking in alleys or abandoned lots. These were people with pensions, with uniforms, with authority. People the public was told to trust. Patrolman, officer, deputy sheriff, court clerk. Names that appeared on public payrolls, names that had signed ethics pledges, names that had attended community meetings promising to clean up the streets. Each name held a place, a function, a responsibility, and each one held a link in the subterranean chain. Together, they formed a quiet logistical machine, a hidden artery pumping narcotics straight through the organs of Massachusetts. Cocaine moved through neighborhoods, through school zones, across nursing home districts, and even through city offices where the walls were decorated with drug-free community posters. And every part of the machine was disguised as normal life. Digging deeper, agents found something even more disturbing. The cartel's shipments were being scheduled during regular government business hours. Packages routed through the State House mailroom as if they were routine administrative transfers. Evidence stored, knowingly, inside municipal warehouses funded by taxpayers. And the cocaine itself? It did not originate anywhere near Massachusetts. It came from La Nueva Sangre, a violent paramilitary cartel spanning the Northeast Corridor. From New York to Maine, known for military-style discipline, battlefield tactics, and a level of political infiltration that rivaled insurgent groups overseas. Badges were being used as smuggling credentials. Oaths had been weaponized. Government positions turned into access points. The question was no longer who was involved. It was how far the infection had spread, and how deeply it had rooted itself inside the system. The next phase would not be quiet. The next phase would not be subtle. It would be a rupture, the moment when the investigation stopped listening and started striking. This was where the silent investigation ended, and the war began. Tap like so, the algorithm does not bury this story. At 3:50 in the morning, inside a reinforced federal command post outside Worcester, the air hummed with a low electric tension, like the moments before a storm crashes open the sky. A massive digital map of Massachusetts glowed across an entire wall, washed in cold blue LCD light. Red markers pulsed across the map, dozens of them, blinking like open wounds on the state's surface. Each marker represented a confirmed link in the syndicate's hidden web. Storage units disguised as family-owned lockers, suburban safe houses posing as everyday apartments, shipping warehouses operating under fake business licenses, and distribution flats tucked quietly beside playgrounds, churches, daycares, grocery stores. Places where families walked daily, places where children played, places where parents felt safe. And behind the thin walls of those ordinary places sat kilos of narcotics and rifles smuggled from foreign war zones. It was infiltration camouflaged as domestic life. At 4:03, the silence cracked open. A single command flashed across the secure operations screen in bold white letters. Action. All units. Instantly, across 5 major operational zones, federal teams snapped into motion. FBI strike groups, DEA raiding units, state tactical response teams, armored transport crews, air support pilots powering up turbine engines. Every unit launched at once, synchronized, relentless, united by a single purpose. 14 targets, 14 minutes. No warning, no escape. At the first location, agents stacked at the door, shoulder to shoulder, a black column of helmets, rifles, Kevlar plates, and controlled breathing. The intruder charge detonated with a white flash, bending the steel frame inward like softened metal. The explosion devoured the hallway in a single pulse of blinding light. Inside, 3 men dove for weapons, scrambling to mount a defense. But there was no defense to mount. Stun grenades erupted, the blasts ricocheting inside concrete walls like trapped thunder. The entire room became a violent blur of smoke, dust, light, and force. When the haze finally thinned, the suspects were already face down on the floor, wrists bound, weapons kicked out of reach. Meanwhile, in Springfield, another warehouse, one masked as a rural agricultural distributor, revealed its true purpose. Beneath stacks of fertilizer, seed pallets, and tractor repair parts, federal agents uncovered something far from farming equipment. 200 pounds of cocaine pressed into uniform bricks, 90 pounds of fentanyl vacuum-sealed into bundles, color-coded for interstate distribution. A fully operational narcotics hub hiding behind a cheerful farm supply sign. But the operation did not stay quiet. In Worcester, the surveillance feed inside a dimly lit garage flickered. A single, stuttering frame, then another, and suddenly the static stabilized just long enough for the system to register movement. A shadow crossing the floor, a figure sprinting, then 2 more. The alarm tripped. Within seconds, agents watching the live feed shouted for teams to reposition. Inside the garage, the suspects panicked. They knew the cameras were compromised. They knew the perimeter was closing. They didn't hesitate. They grabbed rifles, slammed fresh magazines into place, and bolted toward the rear exit. The same route they had used for months to slip out unnoticed whenever patrol units drifted too close. They thought the alley behind the shop was their escape corridor. They had memorized every crack in the pavement, every dumpster, every blind corner. They thought they were running toward safety. They were wrong. The night opened above them with a roar, a Black Hawk helicopter slicing through the sky, its rotor blades hammering the air like artillery. The downdraft slammed into the corrugated metal roof of the garage, sending dust spiraling upward and rattling the windows in their frames. Power lines trembled. Street lamps flickered. Even the puddles on the asphalt rippled under the blast of wind. The suspects froze for a split second, stunned by the machine looming above them like a dark mechanical predator. Then came the voice, thunderous, unmistakable, commanding, "Drop your weapons! You are surrounded!" It shook the alley. It shook the metal dumpsters. It shook the suspects' nerve. But they didn't drop anything. They opened fire. The muzzle flashes tore through the darkness, blooming against the brick walls like bursts of violent fireworks in a canyon. Bullets ricocheted off dumpsters, spraying sparks that bounced across the pavement. Debris chipped off concrete. One round struck a steel drain pipe, ringing out like a cracked church bell. A DEA agent slid behind a concrete barrier, boots scraping against gravel. 2 FBI agents advanced low and controlled, their movements sharp, practiced. Measured breaths, steady bursts, no panic. This wasn't chaos. This was discipline forged in years of raids, training, firefights, and close calls. The suspects weren't trained. They fired wildly, hands shaking, desperately trying to carve a path through the federal cordon. But with every trigger pull, they only revealed their positions more clearly. For 9 long minutes, the alley became a narrow battleground, a place where echoes replaced silence, and muzzle flashes painted the walls in stuttering patterns of white and orange. The air smelled of burned metal and hot gunpowder. Shattered glass rained from a broken window. A bullet cracked through a metal cabinet and exploded into confetti-like fragments. And then, silence. Silence rolled into the alley like smoke drifting after a fire. It was heavy, unnatural, final. 3 suspects lay motionless on the concrete. 2 dropped their rifles, hands trembling uncontrollably as they realized the truth. Every escape tunnel they relied on, every route they memorized, every alley they trusted, had been mapped and monitored for days. They had been trapped before they ever picked up their weapons. By sunrise, the numbers were staggering. 47 arrests, from low-level operatives to mid-tier coordinators, to people who had worn badges for years. 1.2 tons of narcotics seized across multiple locations: cocaine, methamphetamine, fentanyl, counterfeit pills pressed to look like common medications. 129 weapons recovered: illegally modified automatic rifles, ghost guns with no serial numbers, foreign military imports traced to South America and Eastern Europe. Dozens of encrypted phones, encrypted drives, ledger books filled with coded payment systems, initials, symbols, directions, shipment rotations. Above the scene, news helicopters circled like vultures, sensing a story bigger than anything the state had confronted in decades. Residents peered from windows, eyes wide, blankets held against their shoulders. Sirens echoed, flashlights scanned, yellow tape fluttered in the early wind. And across Massachusetts, a single truth settled like ash after a fire. This was not a street gang. This was not a few corrupt officers. This was not a local crisis. This was a fully functioning empire, an entire structure operating beside homes, schools, hospitals, grocery stores, laundromats. An empire that survived by blending in. An empire that thrived because no one looked closely enough. An empire hiding in plain sight. But the raids did more than dismantle safe houses and arrest suspects. They opened the door to what the network truly was. Because once the suspects were dragged away in cuffs, once the firefights ended, once the sun rose over the aftermath, the real war began. The war for the truth. The war for accountability. The war for the institutions that had been quietly poisoned. If you're still here, you're the kind of person who doesn't look away when things get dark. Inside the Boston Federal Analysis Center, the walls glowed with rows of evidence screens displaying everything seized during the night. The room buzzed. Agents, analysts, cyber specialists, forensic accountants standing shoulder to shoulder at long tables. The air smelled like burnt coffee and cold metal from equipment pushed to its limits. Every seized device was cloned, every file examined, every encrypted text message decrypted line by painful line. No shortcuts, no assumptions, only truth. Slowly, a blueprint emerged. Not a map of streets, but a map of power. 4 primary distribution corridors cut through Massachusetts, disguised inside legitimate logistics companies. Trucks that delivered produce, hardware, construction materials. Anything that allowed sealed containers to pass without suspicion. Lamar Cook's cocaine load was only one small endpoint in a supply chain that began near the Mexican border, threaded through Ohio, slipped through New York's warehouses, and finally dispersed into Boston's commuter belt. Then came the storage layer. Buildings labeled as community food donation centers were, in reality, cold storage fronts. Behind stacks of frozen vegetables and shrink-wrapped pallets, bricks of narcotics sat neatly arranged, marked with coded symbols indicating purity, origin, and final destination. Then analysts followed the money. The cartel's financial arteries stretched into 2 private casinos, invitation only, concealed behind unmarked doors. No neon, no crowds, no noise. Just thick carpets that absorbed secrets and walls that swallowed the sound of money changing hands. Here, chips became cash. Cash became credits. Credits became wire transfers shooting through shell companies in Delaware and Puerto Rico, places where oversight died in silence. No alarms, no flags, no friction. The money flowed through the American financial bloodstream as if it belonged there. But then, investigators found something that chilled the room. Charitable organizations. A nonprofit claiming to support youth outreach programs, full of photos of smiling children, school drives, after-school events, had processed over $11.3 million in donations. But the donors didn't exist. The addresses were empty lots. The signatures were fabrications. And the money? Pure drug profit. Worse, the nonprofit paid speaking fees, campaign contributions, security consulting retainers, polite terms for bribes, to several local officials. Carefully laundered corruption dressed in the language of civic kindness. The network built itself to appear helpful. Helpful to the community. Helpful to the schools. Helpful to the very families burying their children from overdoses funded by its profits. That was the heartbreak, the cruel, quiet paradox of the entire operation. The cartel didn't present itself as an invading force or a violent outsider. It didn't hide behind masks or shadows or remote desert compounds. It wrapped itself in banners of goodwill, sponsorships, charity drives, and youth development programs. It handed out backpacks at school events. It donated refreshments at church gatherings. It paid for memorial benches in parks dedicated to overdose victims. Victims created by the very poison it trafficked. It didn't hide in darkness, it hid in daylight. It wore the face of your mechanic who always waved from across the street. Your friendly neighbor who shoveled your driveway during winter storms. Your church donor who quietly filled the collection basket every Sunday. Your local town fundraiser sponsor whose logo appeared on every Little League banner. Your elected representative who shook hands at parades and promised safer neighborhoods. The monster wasn't outside the walls. It was inside them, living there, feeding there, trusted there. It survived not only by violence, not only by intimidation, but by trust. Trust it quietly purchased, one handshake at a time. Trust won with scholarships, with favors, with donations, with sponsorships, with money soaked in fentanyl dust. As the final pins were placed on the investigative board, a hush fell over the analysis room. Screens glowed, maps glimmered. The air felt tight, like the moment before a verdict is read. The scale of what they were facing was no longer just large. It was structural, woven into the bones of the state. 14 targets struck in 14 minutes. $220 million in yearly profit. Thousands of households affected. Entire institutions compromised from within. But amidst the enormity, something else emerged. Something investigators hadn't expected. Weak points, patterns, holes in the armor. Places where the entire operation relied on a very small number of insiders. A handful of people whose removal would collapse entire corridors of the network. The empire was wide, sprawling, intimidating, but in its essential places, it was paper-thin. And paper-thin systems break. The decision came quickly. The next phase would not be observation. It would be purification. The shield had been stained. Now it would be cleaned. The raids had exposed the network's skeleton. The map revealed its nervous system. But the hardest part, cutting out the infected organs, had only just begun. Because the cartel's strongest weapon wasn't cocaine. It wasn't fentanyl. It was the people it had pulled into its orbit. People who opened doors, smoothed paperwork, ignored red flags, or looked the other way. At dawn, unmarked federal vans rolled toward police precincts, city buildings, municipal offices, and administrative wings across Massachusetts. These were not the explosive, battering ram entries of the night raids. These were precise, surgical extractions. The kind of operations where silence is more terrifying than gunfire. Inside a district station in Worcester, officers gathered around morning briefings as if nothing in the world were about to shift beneath their feet. Coffee cups steamed, printers hummed. A television in the corner played muted morning news. Then the doors opened, and federal agents stepped inside. Not with rifles, with warrants. A lieutenant who had served 23 years stared in disbelief as agents removed his badge and sidearm. Symbols he had carried longer than some of the arresting officers had been alive. A detective, praised for reducing neighborhood drug crime, slowly lowered his head as his own handcuffs locked around his wrists, the irony landing like a gut punch. A procurement official froze when agents opened a filing cabinet and lifted out envelopes of community outreach funds, nothing but staged bribe packets, pre-counted and rubber-banded. 17 police officers, 2 municipal administrators, 1 state procurement advisor, all taken into custody before noon. No shouting, no bargaining, just a silence so heavy it bent the air. Some officers couldn't look. Some stared at the floor. Some watched with hollow pain. People who had sensed for months that something was wrong, but never imagined betrayal this deep, this wide, this intimate. On the sidewalk, an elderly man stood holding a folded American flag, the same one he had donated to the precinct after his son's funeral. He watched quietly as officers were escorted out in cuffs. No rage, no screaming, just the empty gaze of someone realizing that the uniform he trusted had betrayed him. Outside, citizens gathered in small clusters, some furious, some heartbroken, most simply stunned, because it wasn't strangers poisoning their neighborhoods, it was the people they waved to at parades. The officers who ran safety workshops in schools, the deputies who saluted the flag with them during ceremonies. Men and women who had sworn oaths, promised protection, wore badges, and now those same badges were being carried out in plastic evidence bags. In Boston, the governor addressed the state. His voice did not thunder with political theatrics. It did not rise in anger or break with emotion. It was steady, heavy. The voice of a man standing over a foundation he finally understood had been quietly collapsing for years. If the badge is used to harm the people, he said, then the shield is broken. And when the shield is broken, we repair it. We do not look away. That sentence became the turning point. Almost immediately, the Integrity Review Task Force was formed, not as a committee, not as a symbolic gesture, but as a fully empowered independent bureau with sweeping legal authority to audit police departments, municipal offices, procurement pipelines, financial transfers, budgeting chains, district operations, and any agency that touched even a single dollar of public funds. This was not a panel of advisors or political appointees. It was a strike team of investigators, forensic accountants, federal auditors, cyber specialists, and legal analysts assembled with one mandate and one mandate only: find the rot and cut it out before it spreads again. There were no political loyalties, no party affiliations, no handshakes behind closed doors. Every member signed a contract that placed truth above reputation and exposure above comfort. They were empowered to subpoena, to seize, to interrogate, to dismantle. They could walk into any office in the state and demand answers, and this time, answers would come. The mission was painfully clear, etched into the founding document like a promise carved into stone. Restore trust where trust had been taken. Rebuild institutions where institutions had been exploited. Protect communities where communities had been deceived. Return integrity to the places that had forgotten what the word meant. It would not be quick. It would not be clean. It would not be simple. But it had begun. And once begun, it would not be stopped. Lamar Cook's arrest had first appeared to the public as a headline scandal, the kind of political drama that cycles through the news every few months. A corrupt official caught with cocaine, money, a pistol, and a fabricated image of service. But within days, within hours even, it became clear that Cook was not the story. He was the warning flare, the first crack in a dam holding back a surge of corruption, so deep and so embedded that the state had almost failed to recognize it. His arrest was the moment the curtain tore open, showing the machinery operating behind it. A machinery that had come close, too close, to overtaking the very system designed to oppose it. From that moment forward, Massachusetts made a vow, quiet at first, then louder, as each department confronted its own reflection. It would not look away again. The shield, once cracked, once stained, once compromised, would stand again. Clean, unbroken, reinforced not by slogans, but by accountability. And this time it would be guarded by people who refused to remain silent. People who had watched corruption creep in, and now stood ready to push it out. When the final door closed that night, when the last evidence ledger was logged into the chain of custody system, when the badges of corrupted officials were collected, tagged, sealed in numbered bags, Massachusetts found itself standing inside a moment of quiet reckoning. Not victory. Victory demands jubilation. Not relief. Relief comes only when danger is gone. This was neither. This was something heavier, more human, more painful. It was the moment after the truth is spoken, when the room falls silent and no one pretends anymore. Because what had unfolded across the state was never just about cocaine, not just about cash bribes, not just about illegal weapons or sealed containers or encrypted ledgers. It was about trust, the invisible contract between the people and the institutions sworn to defend them. And that trust had not been attacked from outside. It had been shattered from within. The warehouse raids, the office arrests, the alley firefights, the loading dock gun battles, the seizures of drugs, documents, weapons. Each one pointed to a truth far more devastating than the narcotics themselves. The threat was not foreign. It was not distant. It was not an invasion. The threat was wearing our uniforms. The threat was signing our forms. The threat was collecting our salaries. The threat was shaking our hands. And yet the same state that had been infiltrated refused to collapse. It fought back, not with denial, not with excuses, not with silence or political shielding, but with relentless exposure and accountability. Badges were removed, offices cleared, departments audited from top to bottom, names spoken aloud without fear of reputation, rank, or history. For once, the truth was louder than the power it threatened. Now, the question that remains is the one that matters most. What do we do next? Because corruption does not die in a single raid. Cartels do not vanish in one operation. Institutional rot does not evaporate with the sound of a gavel or the flash of a camera. Trust does not rebuild itself overnight. This story is not about one office, one city, one state. It is a mirror held to every county, every precinct, every chamber, every agency that believes itself immune, until the moment it discovers it never was. So now I ask you, not as viewers, not as passive spectators scrolling past another headline, but as people living behind the same flag, inside the same system. Do you believe this fight should continue? If you do, hit like so this story reaches the next person who needs to hear it. Comment below, shield or silence. Which side do you stand on? Because neutrality is no longer an option. And if you want to follow what comes next, subscribe and stay with us. The war for integrity is far from finished. Massachusetts was only the beginning. The next state will not fall this quietly.